Welcome everybody to the Gaia journey. My name is Antoinette, and a warm welcome to everyone coming in from all around the world, in all of our different times and places and spaces. As many of us are already doing in the Zoom chat. If you're in Zoom, you can type directly into the chat, say hello and where you're coming from. And if you are on YouTube, you can type directly into the comment there. And if not, then maybe just acknowledge the place where you are. For me, I am standing in Portland Manor, New York, Lenape territory. And I am very pleased to be relaunching our Gaia session with you all, the beginning of our 2021 journey, and looking at all of the incredible places that we're coming from at this very moment. So just seeing here in the chat, Austria, North Germany, Uganda, Italy, Spain, Johannesburg, Cleveland, Ohio. So we are really spanning very many parts of the world, and we will have continuations of this over the weeks to come in various language tracks and regional spaces, which we'll talk more about later. So for those of you who may be new to the journey, welcome. It is a pleasure to be all together and to have you joining in with us. Gaia stands for the Global Activation of Intention and Action, a connection to Gaia itself. And what we have created here is a space for us to have a global sense-making experience. So really begin to understand what's happening in our own place and context and be able to connect with each other around the world. While it's something that the Presencing Institute had been doing for years in a variety of different ways, this is a fairly new iteration of it that really picked up during COVID-19 pandemic. And when it picked up, it was really a moment of, I think, being in New York. It was one of the epicenters of the global pandemic. And when it hit, it was actually right around the time that we were starting the Gaia journey. And there were a couple of options. One was to kind of go into this place of depression and sadness and fear. And the other was to sense into what was actually possible in this moment of disruption. And one of the Gaia Journey participants said, "This is the moment we were born for." And it was something that, hosting and holding this space with you all, I felt personally as well. And I felt deeply, this is the moment that I was born for. And so not only in the holding of the Gaia experience, but also in the work and life that I do outside of this, which is with the Eileen Fisher Foundation, I was able to turn back to my own context and say, okay, if that's true, then what is it that I'm here to do? And what is it that I care about? And for us, it was, turning to our employees and saying, okay, what do you actually need if you're going to be furloughed and we're dealing with a major retail business crisis? What can the foundation do? What can I do in my own place and space? And that's really what the Gaia journey is about. That's the essence of how we come together, is to look at how do we respond? How do we not just react to something that's happening, but really respond from the deeper sources of our humanity and the essence of who we are and what we bring to the planet. So I'm very grateful to be involved with all of you and the Presencing Institute, which has been building on practices and research, a body of research called Theory U, written by Otto and Katrin, who are here with us. Obviously, Otto's here with us, but Katrin, who's here with us and will be introduced later. But Otto, I'll turn it over to you to speak more about this moment.
Thank you, Antoinette, and hello everyone here from the Boston area, also from this angle. It's such a precious moment we are in relaunching and continuing the Gaia journey that we started last year. And thank you, Antoinette, for bringing back this feeling of and this experience of, this is the moment I have been born for. or this is the moment we have been born for. So there's kind of a sense of arriving in a moment where presence is needed, arriving in a moment where we need to turn to each other to make sense of what's going on. And the making sense of what's going on has to do with obviously kind of an old system no longer working, right? And we see many symptoms thereof. And just kind of in the last few days, when you remember kind of the massive protests that we are currently seeing in India from the farmers, in Russia from the citizens, in Brazil, in Nigeria, in Lebanon, in many places, people taking to the streets because here last year, Black Lives Matter was a major part of the Gaia journey. And then Fridays for Future is really not that long ago as the biggest citizen movement here on this continent, on this planet, and that we have seen to date. And so all of that, when we look at that in a bigger picture, there is a very foundational feeling that many of us share, which is that the way we have been organizing our larger systems, our economy, our societies, also our governance systems, are no longer adequate, are no longer appropriate to the challenges that we face. So we need an update of these systems. And most people agree on that there is something broken in the current systems, and we need to reimagine and reshape them. And also most people want to be part of that story, but often we don't know how. And that's really what we want to lean into kind of with the Gaia journey. And so just to share with you an image kind of offer. So this is just kind of, so a plan is not a promise. So what we actually will do will be probably a little different, but kind of that's our current thinking of the journey ahead that we are at the beginning of. That we could lean into the space of emerging future possibility, not only on an individual level, but also on a collective level in a more methodical way. And one way of thinking about that is that it is actually something like a way of leaning into the breathing between system and self. The 20th century and the Cold War system of the 20s that shaped the 20th century was a conflict between one system and another system, capitalism versus socialism. But in the 21st century and the 2020 experience is really bringing to our attention the collapse of another wall, which is the wall between self and system. And that brings the attention to how we collectively co-enact and constitute the various key systems that in many cases are so broken now. And so one way of thinking about that is that the Gaia journey could be like a little bit like a prototype of a mini MBA, of a micro masters in transformation literacy that helps us to understand more of the challenges and acupuncture points of systemic change that we are dealing with. And I just want to, indicate a few of them, and then turning over to Antoinette to share the second half of it, so that you begin a little bit to see how this beginning today is not just a single session, but it's meant to be the beginning also of a larger journey that if you choose to do so, you're invited to engage with. So acupuncture points of change. Obviously, there is like a finance, right? The shift from extractive to just money. To money kind of that, is a tool for positive social impact and equity. A social presencing theater really is shift from systems thinking to systems sensing. which means from a way of engaging with systems thinking that is disembodied to one that is embodied. That will be the focus in the March session. Soil and food, from factory farms to regenerative agriculture, and another kind of massive shift and reframing and paradigm shift that we see going on in our society right now, and that is so much at the heart of the climate struggle that many of us are engaged in. Democracy, from minority rule and dependency to forms of governance that are more direct, distributed, and dialogic. And then, of course, technology, from surveillance, capitalism and surveillance society, really, to co-creativity and freedom. So that's a little bit a possible outline of the first half of this year, which then is leading us, Antoinette, to the forum.
Yep. And for those of you who participated in the forum potentially last year or in years past, you will remember this experience as a place for us to really come together and to learn from each other, to hear what's going on in our different places and spaces. And as it shows here, to kind of sit with that space that we start to see emerging between system and self. The Global Forum, we are hoping for June 15th to 17th, somewhere in there, depending on dates and times and how things evolve with our hybrid or virtual events. So we're putting that together now and welcome input. But that is and will be co-created and a place for you to hold in your calendar for right now. And that will lead us into this of trauma. So just a continuation of some of these acupuncture areas that Otto has started to point out, that will move into a space of the next 5 sessions, and that being healing collective trauma. So really sitting with shadow as a source for transformation and how we move forward as a community by actually healing rather than just kind of jumping over to the next thing. We'll continue with economic transformation, and Otto, I think there are also some taglines there for us, but they're also being developed, so they may change, as Otto said. So we'll move into economic transformation, moving from ego to eco. We'll move to well-being cities, so thinking about how we live and work together, and business and leadership, moving from kind of greed-based and thinking about business from a just kind of getting more and more and more to ecosystem leadership, and the shift in learning and education as well. So the whole of our experience together, and this inhale, exhale between system and self and kind of breaking down the barriers there is also supported by a few other pieces, which you can take part in as much or as little as you want. But, so these sessions are kind of the inhale experience of being able to join us all together as a large global community. And of course, with the Global Forum coming together around a lot of these acupuncture points. But there will also be language and regional sessions. There will be continuation of social solidarity circles. So whether or not you've joined one, you can create them going forward. We'll have discussion space. We'll share the link for that later. And micro practices that we'll share that you can take as you would like to. So take as much or as little as you want. And you'll have that continuation of being able to share with others in the community, and in that sharing, also have an experience of witnessing each other and reflecting and learning from one another. So in part, we're coming together in these conversations to be able to have the whole, but then we're also encouraging you to turn to each other in your own communities, or across some of those geographic boundaries as well. Otto, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So, and now we want to turn to the topic of the first session, which is really to reimagine and reshape finance. And our main co-host and speaker is Katrin Käufer. Katrin is co-founder of PI, the Presencing Institute, and director of Just Money at the MIT Community Innovators Lab. And she is author of the book, Just Money, that came out, Just Money, Mission-Driven Banks and the Future of Finance, a book that published by MIT Press, came out just yesterday. So Katrin, having worked with banks that dedicate 100% of their business to positive social and environmental impact for the past 10 plus years, so which is really the story kind of that you share in this book. What is it that you have learned, and why does this work matter to you?
Thank you so much, Antoinette, and thank you, Otto, for having me. And I think the starting point for my work really connects to what you just outlined. What's my relationship to a system? And there were two starting points for me personally. One was a recognition that we cannot address the challenges we face as society if we don't transform our financial sector. Finance defines our future. Every investment decision we take, whether it's small, whether it's large, whether it's where do I keep my money, whether, what do I invest in, it creates the story of the future that we co-create. So addressing the climate crisis, addressing inequality, addressing marginalization and exclusion is really not possible without the financial sector on board. So that was a recognition. And then I realized I was standing in front of a completely overwhelming, huge system. And how do I personally, as an individual, begin changing my relationship to that and transforming that? And I realized that there are a lot of innovations out there for how to rethink this relationship between myself and finance, myself and the financial sector. And I began exploring that more in depth and working with banks around the world. I also collaborated with the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, which is a network of banks that are actually exactly doing this. Using finance as a tool for social change. So it's more than just saying, I want to avoid doing the bad, but it's about thinking from, or to call this the ecosystem perspective, thinking from the well-being of society and taking this perspective as a departure point for innovating financial products. And maybe, so, sometimes in my conversation with these bankers, we just go back to a very basic understanding of what we are actually doing here. So if, the purpose of us, being a global society is really planetary and human well-being, then the purpose of the economic system is to help us with products and services that we need in order to live and to be. And the purpose of the financial sector is to provide the financial to facilitate the financial transaction in this economic system in an efficient way so that we can operate. But what happens is that this is the other way around. So people and planet are suffering and finance is thriving. So the system that we actually co-created is no longer serving us. And I felt working with these banks is a leverage point for change. And what I found was A, it's possible, which is good news, and B, that as long as we have had finance in financial products, we also had innovators that tried to use finance from an impact perspective, from an intention to really serve the whole and society, to basically reconnect the financial sector to its real purpose. And maybe just briefly to we have this history also here is that there were always credit unions, community banks, depending on where you are in the world. We have saving banks, you have CDFIs in the US. So examples for restrictions on the financial sector. But the last century, these innovations accelerated and became more like movements. So one was in the 70s and 80s, the social responsible investment movement. And those of you who were around during this period, you might remember the anti-apartheid divestment movement that was really strong and had a huge impact. So there was this awakening of a global awareness. We need to reconnect the financial sector. And then in the 90s, we had this whole discussion about triple bottom line, people, planet, profit, that obviously not just affected the financial sector, but also corporates in general, but it became a language. There are long discussions, restrictions, what works, what doesn't work. But in general, I just want to point at, the opening and the emerging paradigm shift here. And then the UN picked this topic up in 2004 with launching the ESGs that are basically a governance vehicle. And then in 2007, what probably most of you today connect with social finance is this impact investment movement that was actually launched from the philanthropic sector and is basically mainstream today. Maybe, Otto, that would be a quick answer to your question at this point.
Well, I think so. That's really so. What I heard you saying is that so this is not new. This is kind of really embedded in a long history, and the when you look at this, of really great initiatives that helped shape really the story we are part of. And that story is a little bit evolving from reducing the negative things, so what to not invest to, right? So that was the entire part. Now we do the same thing with fossil fuel and so forth, or the campus movements here, towards really positive impact, right? So using money as a in a more intentional way, as you said. So you mentioned triple bottom line, John Elkington, and he had this recall a few years back. He said, hey, you're using the language, but the systemic change that I had in mind, that's not really delivered against at all. So if I could do a recall of that concept, that's what I would like to do. So from where you're sitting, what is it then in working with these banks? What have you learned? What actually does make the difference between just using a language that sounds good and basically extending old practices to being really transformative? What have you learned?
So first, I think we have to, so the banks I work with are small banks and they innovate, but this is how innovation happens. So it starts at the margin. And then what I'm seeing is, on the one hand, there are these innovators around the globe. And on the other hand, I see there's also a general shift in our relationship to the financial sector. And first, let me look at these innovators. And I'm so excited that we have two of the innovators in this room who will, join us in this conversation in a few minutes. But the first thing we can see, it's possible. And it has to do with the intention. So it's possible to create a financial institution that serves our good. So just the second thing is, it requires transparency. So some of the banks I work with, especially some of the European banks, have a policy of 100% transparency. They publish all their business loans. And that makes a huge difference, because you as a depositor suddenly see, hey, this is what my money does. So Triodos Bank, for example, has an app. You're in a city in Europe, Madrid, Amsterdam. You open this app and you see what your money finances. And that allows you, when we talk about the relationship between me and the system, such a small innovation allows you as an individual to have agency for how you impact the system. But then when you look at these organizations, you also see that it's so difficult to stay in this balancing act. And we see this with profit is such a driver. This one number is such a driver. Life is so easy if you align an organization just on a one number. So what I've seen in these organizations is that they develop, we call this anchoring mechanism in the organization. So one has to do with governance and ownership. So who is the ultimate decision maker in an organization? And is he, she, or whoever owns this organization aligned with an ecosystem perspective, with a different type of thinking? The second is really about how you organize your business. It has to do with the policies, the structures you put in place. We don't have the time to go into detail there, but how do you onboard? How do you have decision processes when individuals are actually have this daily task to balance impact with profitability. And then the last piece I would like to mention is the culture and the leadership of the organization, which is really relevant. So this is the institutional perspective. The perspective on society is slightly different. The perspective on society is that I see that there is a public shift in how we think about finance and how we think about the role. And I just want, in closing here, mention three cracks or three openings that I noticed. So the first opening is that we realize that finance and money is not neutral. So this idea of neutrality broke up. And the second opening I want to mention, or the second crack, is that we start seeing a diversification of currency. So far we just were running with the euro or the dollar, and now we see different forms of digital currencies coming in, including on a national level. So China and Sweden are already prototyping national currencies, and a wide range of nations around the world are actually experimenting with this. The third opening I see is, and we saw that in the GameStop hedge fund fight in the last 2 weeks, that there is actually a completely new perspective on what is the role of finance in society. So it's little people against Wall Street. And the thinking about Wall Street and finance has completely changed since the financial crisis of 2008. And the last piece I want to mention is exemplified in how Mackenzie Scott donated $4 billion in fall 2020, where she basically changed the way about how do we think about giving and the role of giving. And I just wanted to read a very short quote by her. There's no question in mind that anyone's personal wealth is a product of a collective effort and a social structure which presents opportunities to some people and obstacles to countless others. So she basically says that my personal wealth is not just a function of me as an individual, but my personal wealth is also a function of the collective I'm in. And this is a rethinking about wealth, and it's also rethinking about my relationship.
Very powerful quote. statement that you just read. So a lot of cracks opening up. I think we all are part of that. Katrin, in the last 30 seconds we have in this segment, before turning it over to Antoinette, what is it that so the rest of us here, most of whom are non-bankers, right? What is it? So, okay, so what? What is the implication for us, the non-bankers, and our own agency with money? What does that all mean?
So there is a practical level, which bank are you working with? What's your, what forms of finance are you using? And this obviously depends on, where's your access to alternatives. But it's also an inner shift. I think we have to recognize that money is a social construct. So money is something that we as human beings collectively create. And money reflects how we think about society. And a transformation of the financial system requires our personal agency. What do I do with my money? But it also requires that we recognize and acknowledge that the way we organize our financial system has to do with how we want to organize our society as a whole. So we don't have the time, but we need a governance system for our financial system. And we need to re-democratize finance.
We need to re-democratize finance. Antoinette, with that, over to you.
Thank you, Otto. Thank you, Katrin, for this powerful overview. And I know the conversation continues. But to further conversation, we'd like to draw all of us into a journaling practice, and just to allow some of the thoughts that may be percolating to land through the work of the hands, through the journaling. So if you have a paper and pen nearby, you can pick that up. If you prefer to journal on your computer, that's okay too. But I'll give a couple of questions, or 3 questions, for us to consider, and I'll guide us through that process. So all you need to do is pick up the pen and put it on the paper and see what comes out. So the first question is, where are you already using money for good? Where are you already using money for good or an intentional way? I'll just give you a moment or two to jot down some thoughts. And perhaps you've gotten a few thoughts down around your own personal use of money, and just landing that in the personal space. But also, where are you starting to see cracks in the current money system? So it's something that Katrin spoke a bit about already. Where are you already seeing these cracks in the current money system? These spaces for possibility, these moments of disruption that could lead to something new. And finally, what questions are you holding? What questions are sitting with you now about this conversation around money? So what questions are you holding about money now? And as you complete your thoughts here, you can type directly in the chat, perhaps the questions you're holding or the places where you're seeing cracks in the money system. We can take those into the Zoom chat, into the YouTube comments, and we'll share a few of those out now. So you can, if you can't find the chat button, it's if you're on a computer, it's at the bottom of your screen and a window will pop up. Many of us are already in there. Wonderful. So questions are starting to come in. How do we take the power away that money holds over our everyday lives and interactions? In Africa, there's a huge gap in understanding how money works and creating wealth. How can I be more intentional in sensing the finance system? How can banks rebuild trust? How do we work with funders to encourage them to fund systemic change or landscape scale investment? How do you deal with money in politics? How can we accelerate and create trustable peer-to-peer global platforms to abandon the local banks and country currencies in the older traditional financial system? Question about the use of blockchain in Africa. Cracks in experimenting with encouraging local small businesses. Just want to make sure I'm pulling from YouTube as well. My question is, what can I do? Cracks are public banking and gift economy. Is my money really mine? How can we build decentralized small-scale solidarity circles and interweave them on a global scale? So we've got really powerful comments and questions coming in across the community. Thank you all. Continue to build on this conversation by bringing in our guests today. So Katrin, I turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much. And with that, so, Otto, you asked, what can we do? So we have two guests here who had the same question and then decided to found a bank, which goes probably beyond what a usual response to this question would be. So it's my honor to welcome Mizi Mechali, who is the CEO of the National Stockwell Association in South Zondo, who is the CFO of the National Stockwell Association of South Africa. And welcome to both of you. You are real innovators in the field, and it's such an honor to have you. I really appreciate your time today. To start off us off, could you describe, what are you actually doing? So what is the Stockwell movement, and what's the core idea that your work is built on? Can you describe a little bit what you do? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I guess if I'm to give a brief history, and Mizi will overlay it, the National Stockwell Association of South Africa started in '88. You spoke about the apartheid divestment movement. So in the late '80s, what happened is informal savings groups saving for burial, grocery savings, and even a social time. So very small informal groups, but then they would always meet in secrecy. And at the time, given the socio-political climate, the government at the time was quite intimidated by this practice because they thought it was for subversive purposes. And then our founder, basically as still chairman, was a young 32 years old at the time, went to the Reserve Bank at the time and actually had to explain that Stokvel, it's basically it's autonomous, self-organizing units of people who are excluded from the formal economy, who come together to self-develop and basically promote well-being for themselves. So that is in essence the start of the National Stokvel Association. And I'll allow Mizi to just add on in terms of what happened after that initial meeting in the late 80s.
Thank you very much, Nziga. Thank you to everybody, and thanks for having us. It's truly an honor. I'd like to just start with what Stokvel. So Stokvels are a type of credit union in which a group of people enter into an agreement to contribute a fixed amount of money, whether it's fortnightly or monthly, for a common purpose. So that's what those are Stokvels, and Stokvels are predominantly have existed and thrived in South Africa's townships. And I think, you know, a lot of the language that we use to try to frame this practice is actually language that is taught to us through the work of Otto and Katrin. So when we read and when we reflect on Theory U, we actually find quite a lot of language within there that perfectly describes what we do. But I'd like to read just a little bit from Theory U, with your permission, Otto and Katrin, that basically would frame this practice of Stokvel quite well. It says that what I see rising is a new form of presence and power that starts to grow spontaneously from and through small groups and networks of people. It's a different quality of connection, a different way of being present with one another and with what one. It manifests through a shift in the quality and thinking, and results in a collective action. It is as if an unseen but permanent communal connection or bond. So for us, when we reflect on that, it perfectly describes what Stokvel is. So Stokvels, what we see them as, is a powerful group. These are powerful groups, and these powerful groups are existing independently and are disaggregated. And what NASASA has done is to firstly connect these networks, connect these groups and form networks, and connect these networks now into, connect them to their purpose and connect them to the monetary system. So that being our purpose, we've sought to spoken to in representing Stokvels and appealing to the authorities. We were an advocacy group for Stokvels, and it was important for us to move from purely being an advocacy group to being a developer in the space. And that's the movement that has happened over the past couple of years, 3 decades to be exact, where we've looked at the needs of our constituency. We've seen the need to create infrastructure that would support the movement of the money of our constituency, and also support their objectives. So I'll hand back over to you, Mr. Masonde, just to drive, our purpose alone at any point.
But maybe just before I lead over, thank you. This is extremely helpful. I just wanted to pull out one element that you've mentioned, that is, in a way, money is really about the quality of money has to do with the quality of human relationship. And I feel this is what you are creating, a new form of social relationship by using money. But back to you, Enzika. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you said it in your introduction, Katrin, in terms of the re-democratization of finance. So stokvel groups in South Africa save and consume about $3 to $4 billion on an annual basis. It's a practice that is used by about 11 million people in South Africa, which is almost half the adult population. And in many ways, for us, a big part of it was the realization that you have a powerful network, but this powerful network has to go through the agony of basically integrating their objective and money at all times. And this integration is made difficult because the money on the one hand and their objective are quite far apart, and is together so that there can be more value for the audience of stokvel groups. And to Mizi's point again, how do you create the infrastructure to create the relationship? And having created the relationship, how do you create an ecosystem that can basically then build future possibilities? Because the realization is the financial system is the vehicle through which people realize most of these objectives. And so in many ways, then our thinking and basically the mandate we sort of have from the constituency is, how do we build this vehicle which then basically pulls everyone together and then allows them to emerge into future possibilities.
So can you describe a little bit what are successes, or how does this translate into, the lives of those that you serve?
Well, for us, I guess if I can just speak to what Mizi said. So our first success as an organization was the advocacy, because that advocacy led to the creation of an institution called, which became a formal regulator. And through it becoming a formal regulator, the stokvel practice could continue. And then many years later, that basically went further, where we said, well, it's not enough to just advocate. We need a deeper infrastructure which allows more action in many ways, and a direct and an intention-driven action, right? So that is the graduation we're talking about into banking, because what that does is it creates a vehicle into with which you can move forward. So for us, that's a success. So you've become a regulator, and one of the challenges we had was speaking to the Reserve Bank. They had to ponder quite deeply, can you make an institution both a regulator of the space and then allow them to be an operator as a bank in the space particularly. So for us, that was a big success, because it took us over 5 years, 6 years in order to make it. And then basically, we also, one of the biggest subsets, and Mizi can speak to about it, one of the biggest subsets of our constituency is burial societies. As macabre as it sounds, burial societies are people who come together to give each other dignified burials. It's an issue we have here, where people die and they don't have enough money, you know. So for a long time, there's been this practice where people come together and they save money together so that and unfortunately, they can bury each other. So one of our successes has been creating a vehicle which is wholly owned by burial societies, which then basically starts to realize the issues they have with your more formalized insurance products which exist in the market.
So I hear you're saying we are basically creating two things. We are creating a financial structure and we are creating a social structure. And we try to create both in parallel so that they, you know, align and help each other.
Yes, yeah. So in many ways, Katrin, the most important thing is creating a social structure, because that social structure gives the dialogue. It allows people to communicate, right? But it's not enough for people to communicate. That social structure needs to transform into an infrastructure for actual action to happen, for people to realize their goals and their dreams and their ambitions. And quite importantly, it also needs to be sensitive enough to draw in and be influenced by the people within it.
Thank you. So Mizi, from your perspective, what is pulling you into the future? So what's your vision? So where do you see your work going?
I mean, our vision is a direct response to a promise that has been made to our people back in 1955, when the Congress of the People adopted what is called the Freedom Charter. And the Freedom Charter is really what anchors our mission and our vision for the future. So the features of the Freedom Charter would be firstly, the people shall govern. All national groups shall have equal rights. All shall be equal before the law. All shall enjoy equal human rights. There shall be work and security. The doors of learning and culture shall be opened. There shall be houses, security, and comfort. There shall be peace and friendship. The land shall be shared amongst those who work it. And the final component of that Freedom Charter, which is the focus of our life's work, is that the people shall share in the country's wealth. That's important because it is the missing component in this ensemble. And this ensemble is what creates an equal society and a country which functions. So it's a very critical component, and it also speaks directly to money. So how is this promise going to be fulfilled? Firstly, that's a question that we asked ourselves. Who will fulfill this promise? And how is it going to be done? And the answer for us was always through finance and banking. And when you look around and see that this is a promise that doesn't really have a home, and there isn't anybody who has put their hand up to fulfill the promise. And we saw that it's really up to us to complete the promise of the Freedom Charter and to use banking and financial services in order to do that. And for us, what we are going to create through this program, South Africa is the most unequal country in the world. We can see the points that make it such, and we understand what needs to be done in order to make the necessary corrections. Because what we will have at the end of this process is we will definitely have a situation where the people share in the country's wealth, and that's our overall vision. What's done is we need to lean on these powerful networks that have been corrected. And it's important to understand that these groups operate independently. So for a long time, the Stokvel practice was adopted almost organically. And you find that there are many 800,000 plus groups who behave pretty much in the same way. Now, these groups are disaggregated. And what NASASA has been able to do is to turn these groups into networks. For the first time, creating the connections between these groups in order to form a network. Once we've understood the nature of the groups within this network, we realize the power in creating infrastructure to support the objectives of these groupings. And for us, that becomes our life mission, to say, how do we create the relevant infrastructure to support, firstly, the movement of funds, but secondly, as Nziga has alluded to, it's important for this infrastructure to be owned by people and owned by the constituency in a democratic way. Now, at the moment, the production and distribution of money is in private hands. And that is the flaw in South Africa's system, the fact that the production and distribution of money is in private hands. What we are looking to do through our bank is to put the production and distribution and movement of money in the hands of the people by giving them equity in that process. We believe that that's the most transformative thing and the biggest gift we can give to our people, to not only allow them to participate in the mainstream, but for them to own the center of that mainstream economy. We believe in this project, and we believe that this project is the solution for our country's problems. And Nziga and I are not here alone. We stand on the shoulders of giants, the giants being our constituency, the giants being the staff that support everything that we do, as well as our founder, who has been an inspiration to all of us. Mr. Andrew Lukele has dedicated his livelihood, the past 3 decades of his life, towards this vision. And we are very proud to take it forward and drive the next phase of the organization. So what Nziga and I pride ourselves in has been our ability to build an institution around this idea, part of everybody around us.
This is an amazing and powerful vision, and I really feel the strength of this idea to make money serve society. And I think, you know, you have this enormous practical impact, but I think you also create an example for the world for how to rethink that. So in closing, I would like to both of you, you know, if the few minutes we have left here, so what gave you the courage to break this boundary between self and this huge system of finance? What inspired you? I mean, Mizi, you were so clear about, you know, this is a tool. Banking and finance is a tool for social change. Maybe you can both close with a personal reflection. What gave you the strength to do this, to dare to do this?
If I can go first, if I can go first, Katrin. I guess coming from a background like South Africa's, and given our history as a country, growing up, and I'm saying growing up, I'm Black, I'm from a country where Black people were marginalized for a long time. I found myself actually on the right side of everything. And what I mean by that is I grew up and I was incredibly privileged. So I'd walk to school, but I'd have school shoes on. And my schoolmates wouldn't. When I finished school, I could go to varsity. My schoolmates couldn't. So at some point, to speak to what you said earlier, Katrin, in the quote, I just realized that I was a product of things that came way before me. And I realized that I was a product of a social system, which was family, which was able to allow me to reach my potential. And realizing that, I realized that we could actually create other systems which are similar, which can actually elevate everyone and allow them to reach their future potential. And if we can create systems which allow every single person to do that, they have a more equitable and a better world. So that for me gave me the courage at some point to leave and say, well, I should actually focus all my energy into doing what we do here in Nasasa.
Nziga and I do come from quite similar backgrounds, so I wouldn't want to repeat what he has said, but what's encouraged us, I think, really has come from, I think the idea that something is difficult to do is really a flaw in the human psyche. So we do this because it's necessary. And I would say that it's not anything else but the fact that it's necessary to do this. As long as it's necessary, we feel compelled to do it. And we're driven by that force that compels us to do this, although it may seem difficult.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being with us today, and also for the work you are doing. I feel you set an example for a change and a revolution that is possible, and thank you for doing this. Really very much appreciate that. Thanks. Over to you, Antoinette.
By the stories that you shared and the possibilities of using banking as a tool, and yeah, I'm just very inspired. And as we take that inspiration, we now will turn to each other and have small group discussions where we can really just process what's been coming up for us, what's been coming up in our journaling questions, what questions we're still holding, and what has been inspiring us in this conversation, so that we might take that inspiration forward and not just let it live here as something that we just heard and sounded great. So the question is, what is activated in me now around money? What is activated in me now? So we will turn to each other in these small groups, and we encourage, it's a short time, but hopefully you get to really just listen to each other, give the gift, just hearing one another, making sure everyone has time to talk. We'll have 12 minutes, and you may want to stay in touch with this group going forward. So feel free to note the people in your room. So enjoy your time together and discussing what is activated in me now around money. See you back here in 12 minutes. Welcome back, everybody. I think we're all here in all of our rooms. As many of you know, we are in multiple Zoom rooms that are connected together. And that said, we are able to hear from everyone in a variety of ways. So one is you can type directly in the chat and share insights that may have come up about what is activated for you, what maybe came up in your group. And you can share that directly in the chat. And we can also raise hands and share across voice and video. So using voice and video. So if you would like to share a comment, you can raise your virtual hand by clicking on the reactions button if you're in Zoom, reactions, and then raise hand. And we will see your raised hand and be able to bring you across to share what's coming up for you. I see Brad Smith. Let's see if we can get you.
Oh, wow. Can't imagine, I'm first. The thing I was going to add at the end of my group is that some hope, which is maybe hard to see, is that the breakdown of the current system is creating an opportunity for transformation. So that's what I want to add. As the current system is breaking down around, seize the moment and work together, we do have an opportunity to transform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brad, for sharing. We're going to hear from Channel 2, Susan Ross.
So I've been doing this for a few days and it's been fun. But one of the things that keeps coming up for me is, obviously, I'm in the United States. We're in the middle of a very difficult conversation about this. Things are going to change. We don't know how, but it seems like things like a universal income, basic income, seems to be something that needs to be just another system. It's probably what might get us through this, as far as I can tell, because otherwise I don't see how it's going to go forward for us as a species, unless we actually think about that not as just being kind or altruistic, but it's just sort of a basic thing. You have to eat, you have to have shelter. Wouldn't be that hard to do that, I don't think, if we just decided to do it. I think that's all I want to say.
Thank you, Susan, for bringing that in. We will move to Roya Brown.
Yeah, here
next.
Oh, sorry for my hair use. I live in the United States, Denver, Colorado, and I was talking to my friend last night. I used to be a healthcare activist, still an activist, and we were talking about if the pandemic didn't bring about Medicare for all, what would? When 400,000 people died in this pandemic, and then our political system getting money from these insurance and pharmaceutical companies, and they just not passing anything to access Medicare for all. So we decided, what if, I don't know about other states, but in Colorado, Vietnamese people came in and they opened up their shop for manicure and pedicure, and they took over the whole industry. So nobody except them do it, because they are doing it so cheaply and efficiently that everybody is using that. We said, what if we start a little, like a clinic, and bringing nurses or whatever, and start and charging people very, very little and flood the market. So force the insurance companies and pharmaceutical to back off. So this is my idea, and I really think is a great idea of little guys can do something to basically impact and bring about what they need, because about 76 to 80% of American people are all for this. But our political system is not going to do anything for us. So this needs to start with us. That's it.
Thank you, Roya, and thank you for that reminder of coming back to starting with ourselves. And I just want to read, before we move to another comment, read from the chat from Barbara. I had an aha moment. My relationship to money is a projection about my implicit view of my place in the world, using it to control and to be independent. It's unintentional and reflexive. So much to become intentional about. Thank you for sharing that, Barbara. And I'll pass it to Sadiq next.
Hi, thank you so much. Thank you, Antoinette. Yeah, part of what it is that we have done is, I'm in South Africa. And so what we have done, we have really gone in for the good of our money, supported a lot of, and so we are within the community, whether it be along fruit and vegetables or whether it be goods and services, for example. And many of these businesses have actually, been structured as home businesses. And so the money itself stays and circulates within the community. There's no, interest and things added or anything. And sometimes when you don't have money, you're able to trade in terms of, I can get goods from you and I will offer you a service in exchange. But what is unfortunately happening is the fact that many of these home industries are now being shut down by our government. And the reason why they're being shut down by government is because many of these companies are no longer, or these little small home industries are not paying taxes. So the state tax coffers are actually now dwindling in South Africa, besides the corruption. And so what is actually happening is that our government or our government agencies are going around and actually wholesale closing many of these community initiatives because it no longer brings taxes in the coffers. And I think this is something that worldwide we have to become aware of, that our government depends on the free money that we give them, our taxes, in order to do whatever it is that they need to do. But the moment we go into a communal form of trading or communal form of coexistence, the taxes becomes an issue for us. And by law, we get the short end of the stick as community activists, actually. So I just want everybody to remember that if we do move into community involvement, that government is certainly going to have a response to them not receiving taxes. Thank you very much. Thanks, Antoinette.
Thank you, Sadiq. And I know that there are multiple more raised hands already and other comments. And I wish that we had time to stay together for longer. And the good news is that we can continue through discussion boards and continued conversation, and feel free to stay in touch with you and even to start social solidarity circles, which I'll talk more about as we close, which will be a few minutes from now. Before we do that though, I'd like to turn it to Olaf and activate this other intelligence that we have in the room with us today. So Olaf, I'm going to turn it over to you before our resonance practice on the image you've been working on.
Thank you. I don't have much to say other than it started right in the beginning already with what can I do, and it's the moment we were born for, and somehow it always came back to that over the whole thing. So that's all from me.
Thank you, Olaf, and thank you for being with and reflecting this back to us. So what I'll encourage you to do is, if you haven't already, to make your screen full screen on Zoom, if you're able, or YouTube, wherever you're watching. And we'll just zoom in our own way on this image and just be with the image. So we can just focus in directly on the image, which would mean making me not visible. There we go. So just sitting with this image and noticing what we see, sense, and feel for just a few moments. And as you're ready, you can type directly into the chat using the prompt, I see, I sense, I feel, and type directly in the reflection. I see, I sense, I feel. I see a lot of hope and energy. I sense opportunities. I feel life. I sense the margins growing. I see the good coming from the cracks. I see inequality. I sense a shift. I feel optimistic. I see money is by far not neutral. I see a huge opportunity for money transformation. I see connection to future as possibility. I sense collective. I sense crumbling. I feel tension. I see seeds with plenty of energy popping out.
I see abruptness. I sense swift change. I feel activated and nervous. Explosion, I sense chaos. I feel disruption. I see both pain and energy. I sense value in each individual transformation. I feel it is up to us. I see the breaking down and breaking through. I see the early spark of an epic moment. I sense the possibility for positive change. I feel alive through connecting with others who are awake to the emerging future. I feel the need to find balance from within. I see protest and activism marching on the streets. I see light of a new system in the shadow of the actual.
Thank you all for stepping into this resonance of seeing and sensing, feeling together. Thank you, Olaf, for the gift that you've been sharing with us. And I will turn it over to Otto for some final remarks before we close.
It's up to us. maybe we can just keep watching the image. The other thing that's staying with me is the profound possibility that we face that has been articulated in so many ways. And then also the other element, the conflict, tension, the disruption. So all of that is so present when we look at this. And what I want to say in the end, so when we just rewind the last 90 minutes, it was really about the power of intention and how we can transform economic relationships when we bring more attention and intention into the use of money. And I just want to end with underlining Mizi and Zika, your wonderful words that really kind of embody the essence of maybe when I am lucky, I can strive towards, and many of us maybe, which is, in your words, moving from an advocacy organization to creating a deeper infrastructure that enables intention-driven action. And then in the end, you said, giving people a piece in the production, distribution, and use of money. And when Susan talked about UBI, Universal Basic Income, and Roya talked, I think all of these are aspects of democratizing, which means kind of giving people a piece in the production, distribution, and use of money. So I think what you shared with us has been really opening a space that needs all of us as activists, all of us as change makers. Wonderful beginning and a deep bow for the work that everyone is doing, particularly Mizi and Zika, the two of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Otto, and a really just deep bow gratitude to our guests today, Mizi and Zika, and to Katrin for the body of work that you've been sharing with us and have shared now in the Just Money book, but also in the Just Money. For those of you who may not be aware, there is a massive open online course similar to ULab, which many of you may be familiar with. And it is reopening in March, on March 15th. So you can dive deeper into coursework and community discussion on the Just Money MOOC and really, further the exploration there. But as we go forward in the Gaia journey, you can continue the conversation goals. And I just want to explain some logistical final details here that many of you may be familiar with hubs, and some of your hubs may have gone online. Hubs are ways that we have organized geographically around a certain place. So we've had a hub in Westchester County, and it's a Westchester County hub. And that's a bit different than a solidarity circle, which is a smaller group of people. It might be people from your hub, and people that you've met online. So people that could be across geographic boundaries or industry areas, but it's a group of 4 or 5 people, and you can develop that solidarity circle if you haven't already. It's a place where you can reflect and share the practices or share the work that you're doing in your own context. Or if, like Roya, you have an idea of how you want to take something forward, you might start with a solidarity circle to have that reflection. And then you can also continue in a discussion space on Sutra. So if you go to GaiaJourney.org, there are links to both of these things, Social Solidarity Circle and the Sutra discussion space, where you can talk about what came up in the session, share continued conversation or ideas in that larger forum. So those are 2 links on GaiaJourney.org. And we also encourage you to do that micro practice be more complex over time. We did a number of them throughout the 14 weeks in 2020. But the micro practice that we invite you into today is really to pay attention to something that is going on. And that could be, you know, a lot of us have talked about what is my intention around money. And one potential practice that you could take forward, and we'll send something out as well, is to pay it forward. And there are a number of ways to do that, but just as micro action that we can take with our money is perhaps to buy someone a coffee, and you know, just that you may not have thought about before, and just, you know, pay it forward for the next person. So that's an example. You can pay it forward and then pay attention to their reaction and your own reaction inside yourself. Often we have an agenda when we're, you know, I'll buy you a coffee and we'll have a conversation. This is just paying it forward. This is for the next person behind me, and seeing what the action or reaction activates within you and within the person that you may be gifting that to. And that said, thank you to all of you who have participated and all of you who come together as community. The Presencing Institute is a nonprofit organization, and so many of you have stepped forward to support that organization and to support us to continue this Gaia journey work. So for those of you who can continue to do that, we appreciate your donations and appreciate your support. There are so many who have volunteered and so many wonderful team members in the Presencing Institute as well, and in our language tracks and regional groups. So thank you all for all the ways that you participate, and you can find more information about how to get involved on the GaiaJourney.org site. So we look forward to seeing you again. We will continue with another session at 12 Eastern with further guests, and we will also continue on March 4th with our next session on social arts. So thank you, everyone. We'll send out a follow-up email with everything I said, so you don't need to memorize it. We can all unmute and say goodbye. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
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 Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Gracias.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you in South Africa too.